All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we're going to talk about a visiting professor to Brigham Young University, talking about the Book of Mormon and advocating for, within the Book of Mormon, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I had told you guys that this was coming. It's going to continue to come, and it's going to get worse and worse. Now, before we dig into this, I want to talk about our sponsor, Cardio Miracle. This is a product I take every day. I take it 3 times a day. The reason I take it is because I am getting results from it. And when I say results, I'm talking about measurable things. I test my blood pressure. I have just had the best doctor's appointment I've ever had with my cardiologist, saying that my arteries are fantastic. Number of different things. Gout has completely changed since I started to take this product. So go to cwicmedia.com, that's CWICmedia.com, and check out the video there at the bottom of the page and discover why I take this and why you should try it out. All right, getting to Eduardo Pagan, who is a visiting professor from Arizona State University right here in my backyard, who visited Brigham Young University and talked about what the Book of Mormon has to say about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, there are 2 things that I have been saying about the church that are going to happen. And I cannot tell you the pushback that I get in this from both sides of the political spectrum. People don't believe me on this. I'm telling you, I have studied critical social justice for 11 years. Critical theory has one goal, and the goal is to redefine your worldview and put into a Christian context. It is to redefine God. And so you end up with 2 things with the Latter-day Saints. Number 1, you're going to end up with a new worldview. Not you, but critical social justice is going to give us a new worldview to look at with the Book of Mormon. And secondarily, it is liberation theology. It is going to change what God is. And this is already happening. And I have talked a lot about Teddy Bear Jesus and why that is so important to understand the evolution of the change of Jesus Christ within the church. And when I say within the church, I'm not talking about the brethren, of course. I'm not talking about the priesthood. I'm talking about the members of the church and a cultural perspective. And the reason there is a teddy bear Jesus is to soften up the belly of God. It is to soften him up so that you pull away from the idea of sin and judgment. And I'm going to go right into this with this visiting professor here and what he's talking about, because it goes right along with what he's doing with the Book of Mormon. You take away sin and judgment, and all of a sudden Jesus is a teddy bear. He is there for comfort, something very cozy, something to watch over you and give you safety and warmth, etc. Okay? Once he has been softened up by removing sin and judgment from the equation, now he is malleable in our minds, right? And so we can now take that softened up Jesus and we can mold him into a revolutionary, a political Messiah. And I'm going to add this episode into my series on liberation theology. I recommend you take a look at that. This will be the 3rd episode that is in that series. Basically, it's saying we're going to choose Barabbas over Jesus, just as the Jews did. Right? Barabbas is a political Messiah. Jesus is a spiritual Messiah. Barabbas wants to throw off the shackles of the oppressors. Jesus wants to throw off the shackles of iniquity and sin. Okay? And what this professor is bringing up here, and he's very articulate. He says some very good things also. Seems like a very accomplished historian. But he's doing the same thing. I'm not going to pull back on that. I'm just not. This is exactly what I said was going to happen with the Book of Mormon. I have been talking about this for a couple of years, specifically in lectures and other speaking engagements. And this is exactly what he's going to go into. He's going to go into the dissenters of the Book of Mormon and talk about critical theory. He doesn't bring up critical theory, I don't think, but that's basically what he's doing. He's going to apply critical theory to the Book of Mormon. And when you apply critical theory to the Book of Mormon, you take away the gospel of Jesus Christ and you insert a secular point of view, a secular worldview. And I'm astonished. Actually, I'm not at all. I'm not astonished at what he is doing here with the verbiage of the Book of Mormon. We're going to get into that. Now, I had said that these two things, which they go hand in hand. A new critical theory worldview of the Book of Mormon, number one, and number two, a liberation theology which changes Jesus into a political Messiah, right? And I have said that this will come out of academia. And it's going to come from our Latter-day Saint scholars, some of the Latter-day Saint scholars, and it's going to come from what we call Mormon Studies, which is both Latter-day Saint scholars and other scholars. That's where this will come from, because these individuals are brought up through their training in academia with critical theory. And you'll even hear some of them say, look, we're going to look at the Book of Mormon and we're going to run it through a filter of what they might say something like continental philosophy, which ultimately what they're talking about is critical theory. And that's what they're doing. And you're seeing more and more of this come out in books with scholarship, where you see identitarianism. You see the idea of the oppressed and the victim more and more. It is getting brought from a spiritual meaning down to a secular temporal meaning. And this will happen. I am telling you that this will happen. I have studied this for 11 years. I have seen what these ideas do to every other institution out there. And the inevitable end of this is liberation theology and a critical theory view of the Book of Mormon, which, if you haven't heard me talk about this, will shock you as to what the Book of Mormon is being changed into. Now, this here then is Eduardo Pagan. He's from Arizona State University. The title is What the Book of Mormon Says About Equity and Inclusion. Now, you'll notice here, a little bit lower here on this, it says this is part of the Fernando R. Gomez Latino Lecture Series. Of course it is. And this is something that is, whether it's in K-12 or it's in the universities, whenever you have something that's Latino series or it's African American studies or it's ethnic studies, this is not about talking about the culture and learning just about their cultures. It is driven completely by a leftist Marxian indoctrination. That is what it is. So you may have the Fernando R. Gomez Latino Lecture Series here at BYU. I'd be pretty surprised, maybe I'll be wrong, if they ever bring in as an example a Cuban who has lived through or whose parents have lived through Castro, who have lived through, been bathed in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It won't happen. They just aren't going to do it. This is the same idea as who are we going to bring in for the book of the semester with the Kennedy Center at BYU, right? It's Ibram X. Kendi and his anti-racism, his Marxian tenant books, right? That's what it is. Or other critical social justice advocates. That's what you get with ethnic studies, African American studies, and Latino studies. You know, I lived in Mexico for 2.5 years. I've been there studying. I've been there on business. Went there on my mission. I never saw anything in the regular culture that would identify Mexicans as Marxists, unless they're going out into their political party somewhere. It has nothing to do with their own identity, right? They're individuals. But of course, if it's Latino lecture series, it is almost inevitable that all of the topics and individuals are going to be leftists. Now, let's go to a couple of excerpts here from Professor Pagan on his lecture.
Let me begin with this. I want to do two framing issues. First of all, it's the concept of iniquity. Iniquity, it's a very interesting word. It is mentioned, to my count, about 111 times in the Book of Mormon. Far more than abomination, far more than wickedness. It is the one concept in terms of wrong behavior, of injurious behavior, that is mentioned the most. So this is from the Oxford English Dictionary, as I mentioned before, iniquity. Of course, this is a term that we're familiar with, the definition we're familiar with, the quality of being unrighteous, or more often, unrighteous action or conduct. This is the piece that interests me. There we go. Sometimes, especially in early use, wrongful or injurious action towards another. Infliction of wrong, injury. There we go, I think that's it. In modern use, generally connoting gross injustice or public wrong, inequity. Inequity. In fact, the term iniquity comes from the Latin term inequus, which means unequal or unjust. So when you see that term, and as you study the Book of Mormon, I want you to think, is it referring, or in what ways is it referring to unjust behavior, unjust action?
All right, so a couple of things here. This is very important to understand what is happening here. Again, exactly what I've said is going to be happening, and it's not just here, right? It's happening more and more and more from academia on the Book of Mormon, from Latter-day Saint scholars. But what he's saying here is, I want you to think of iniquity, the term iniquity, as inequity. In other words, I want you to change your worldview. We're going to start, and imagine these college students are going to now think this way, or they're at least going to have it in the back of their minds. Think of what this does, right? Iniquity. You look at iniquity, for example, go through the entire Old Testament and find iniquity. And over again, you might see a few examples where you're talking about something that's oppressive or unjust between peoples, but it's almost always related to sin. Okay? And this is I'm not saying he's doing this on purpose. He is one of tens of thousands of professors that if they read the Book of Mormon, they're going to say the exact same thing. This is not novel. What he is bringing here is not like, wow, this is really interesting. You've really come up with something. No, all he is doing is applying the religion of academia, critical theory, to the Book of Mormon. And that's why I know these things are going to happen. That's why I've been giving talks on these things, because it's obvious where the direction is going to go with all of this. But when you take iniquity and sin and you remove it, like Ibram Kendi does, right? And you move it out, what you've done is you've pulled away the doctrine of Christ. Because if I remove iniquity and the idea of what iniquity is, what I'm talking about is myself or my people and what we have to do to change. See, I need faith in Jesus Christ and the atoning sacrifice to repent and to change and to grow and to learn. What I now do is I take iniquity and I move it to inequity. And now I say, wait a minute, this is moving away from a spiritual realm into a temporal political realm. And I'm lowering this from spiritual things to temporal carnal things, political things. And now, see, the problem is out there. The problem's not with me. The problem's out there with the oppressors and the inequity. And this is what this does. I've got a principle that I talk about called telos versus the oppressors. And the telos is, moving forward and progressing to an end, to completion, to fulfillment. President Nelson has talked about this with Matthew 5:48. Be ye therefore perfect is actually teleos, right? It's a completion. Be fulfilled, be complete. The temple is a great metaphor for this. And you remove that. That's what social justice does. That's what critical theory does. It removes it and it says, no, it's inequity, and the problem is out there. And my new morality is in being an activist to throw off the shackles of the oppressor instead of what was meant by the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ to throw off the shackles of sin. This is a huge disservice to the study of the Book of Mormon, but it's expected. And it's going to get worse. Now, that's not to say, and this is important, that part of sin isn't oppressing others or looking at yourself in a prideful manner. The pride cycle is a very real thing in the Book of Mormon. And if they're not paying attention to the poor, and they're proud, and they this is represented oftentimes by their clothing and their fashion and their expensive things and jewelry, then obviously that is sinful. That's part of iniquity. That's part of being an iniquitous state. But don't pull away from the idea of sin. This is a meme. This is so ridiculous. It is so obvious. Again, this is plug and play. I can plug and play here with Professor Pagan, I could put Ibram Kendi in here, have him read the Book of Mormon, and he's going to come up with the same thing. Or Angela Davis, or Richard Delgado, or Gene Stefanchik, or Kimberly Crenshaw, or D'Angelo, or many others. It's the same thing. Or almost every professor in the humanities, especially in history. And you're going to get the same thing. That's why it's going to happen. It is inevitable. This is their training. This is their worldview. And critical theory is in direct opposition to the doctrine of Christ. Direct opposition to the doctrine of Christ. Because it doesn't just give you another way of looking at things and looking at the power dynamics. You are always automatically converted and activated by this ideology. All right, let's go to another clip.
The Nephites, though, we know this, that power and control of the kingdom is conferred to only those who are descendants of Nephi.
That's true.
So what that means then, again, you remember, that small slice there in yellow, they were the only people who were allowed to hold power position in the kingdom, or the Nephite nation. Well, I would, just by my eyeballing this, 4/5 of the people were excluded from power, from governance, as far as what we have in the record, from leadership as well. You know that there are multiple revolts. There are rebellions that take place, right? Do they have anything in common? What I find interesting is that if you were a native Zarahemla, as I thought about this, your nation is controlled by a minority population, a foreign population as well. They speak a different language, they have a different religion, different culture, different economy. This is how it would look to a native Zarahemlite, right? So their language, their identity, their religion, all of it had been imposed upon them. And I suspect, I wonder if this was an underlying cause of resentment. When we see the history then of rising factions, revolts, challenges to power and authority, the defections, they all have the appearance, to me at least, as rebellions against inequity.
Again here, this is, he's making assumptions, all right? I don't doubt that these are power dynamics that took place. I think many of us have thought about these things. He's throwing everyone though into collectives, and this is not a way that, this is not something that works. In my mind, it's not just a matter of, the Nephites that came from the land of Nephi. They enter in with the Mulekites and Zarahemla, and so you have two different factions and two different groups. I think that is overly simplified, and I don't buy it for a second. And I've seen many times people talk about the naming conventions of the dissenters and how they all have the MLK, kind of like the Mulekites. I don't buy it for a second. That's not what it is. That's not the issue. And I can go over that here as well, but it's not that. It's the Amalekites. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the Mulekites. They're talking about the Old Testament Amalekites, who are the adversaries and the bloodsuckers, so to speak, the bloodthirsty ones. That's what they're talking about. That's why they have the names of AMLK. It's not just MLK. It's all with the A in front of it, and that's important to understand. All right, so if I look at these names, for example, because I don't want you to think that this is just about the Mulekites and the Nephites, right? Even though that could be a strong undercurrent, the point is that there are theological differences, there are political system differences, right? Liberty versus a king, or liberty versus, let's just say, tyranny. There are differences in the church, right? One wants to destroy the church and probably set up a different theological system. And so it's important to see that the dissenters are not just the Mulekites. That's not the point. And that's a wrong view in my mind, right? So if I look at the names here, I've got the Amlicites, and in early manuscripts, it looks like this might have been a mistake. Some say it is, some say it isn't, if you look at Scalzon's work. But you've got the Amlicites, the Amalekites, and the Amalekiahites, right? These are all MLC or MLK names, like as in Mulek. However, they all have an A in front of them, right? And you can't ignore that. Remember that the Lehites, when they leave Jerusalem, they have already a very strong tradition as Israelites with the adversaries who are the Amalekites. The Amalekites are the very first adversary to the children of Israel when they leave Egypt. Remember when Moses' hands are being held up, right, so that they could win the battle, or his arms? That's against the Amalekites, and they continue to fight with the Amalekites ongoing. Saul fights with the Amalekites, right? They're continually fighting against this adversary, the Amalekites. And so we could look at this in a way that says, look, these are the adversaries to this remnant of Israel, this remnant of Joseph. And they are the Amalekites, or a form of the Amalekites. We can look at different interpretations of Amalek, right, for Amalekite, right? One of those interpretations, those translations, is blood lickers, literally the people that lick blood, right? Am is the people, and Lek would be the blood lickers. And so that would mean that they are the bloodthirsty ones. We can see here, in fact, in a number of the verses where you could be looking at parallelism here. You see in Alma 49:10, you've got Amalekiah here at the top, who, by the way, is a Nephite. He is not a Mulekite. And think about Amulek, another AMLK name, the companion of Alma the Younger that was preaching at Ammonihah. He's a Nephite. Or Amulek, who is also the one who is a different Amulek that is holding on to the records and is written up in the book of Jerem. Right? He's a Nephite holding on to the records. These are not all names that have to do with Mulek. So you have Amalekiah here, and then with the parallelism you see at the bottom here of the verse, it says, he did care not for the blood of his people, right? So that could be a parallelism that is happening here. And it's not just once. Look again here in 49:27. Yea, he was exceedingly wroth, right? This would be Amalekiah, and he did curse God and also Moroni, swearing with an oath that he would drink his blood. Right, in Alma 51:9, again, Amalekiah here at the beginning of the verse, and at the end, for he had sworn to drink the blood of Moroni. Now, these are some of the differences that we really need to look at. This is not about just a dispossessed people. In fact, that is not the message of the Book of Mormon. Here's the message of the dissenters. That is that they all want a king, right? They want to overthrow the system of liberty that the Nephites have. They want to destroy the church, probably put their own church, something like a Deuteronomist type of a theology and church back in place. They all have an antichrist doctrine. That's the key. They all have an antichrist doctrine. The antichrists are not just Korihor and Sherem and Nehor. Right? The Antichrists are all the dissenters, many of which are of the order of Nehor. And all these dissenters go and join the Lamanites. They all go join the Lamanites, who are also Antichrist. They don't believe in Christ. And by the way, the Zoramites also ended up dissenting. They did not believe in Christ. King Noah and his priests, they did not believe in Christ. In fact, that is the reason they killed Abinadi, was because he was preaching about Christ. Look at Mosiah 7, okay? And they all go to battle against the Nephites, right? They all want to overthrow the Nephites more than the Lamanites want to. And we should understand that the Book of Mormon is about these dissenters and the battle they have with the Nephites, who, though they have many problems and keep following through that cycle of pride, are guided by the prophets and the priesthood and the Lord. Do not forget that, because as we walk down this path of critical theory and deconstruction with the Book of Mormon, what's going to happen is that the Nephites are going to end up becoming the enemies, and the heroes will be the dissenters, the dispossessed, as the professor here is trying to say. So we need to be very careful about what the real story of the Book of Mormon is and the message of the Book of Mormon. The message of the Book of Mormon is the Book of Mormon, another testament of Jesus Christ. The dissenters are anti-Christ. That's the story. It is not the Book of Mormon, iniquity becomes inequity. It is not the Book of Mormon, the story of the victims and the oppressors. It is not the Book of Mormon, a critical pedagogy for the last days. This is, it's if it wasn't so real what is happening here, it would be funny. It's such a meme. But what he is pulling out here again is a political, it's a political book. Look, the Book of Mormon is a very political book. But he's saying that it's only the politics of a different people that have power and authority imposed on them. Now, think about that. He's using a very critical theory type of argument on this that doesn't make a whole lot of sense and doesn't hold a lot of water. Because the majority, the Mulekites, the majority, as he says that there are 80% here. I'm not sure where he's getting that number. It's at least 2/3. But he's saying 80% couldn't hold. You're talking about the descendants directly of Nephi, were the ones that had to have power. Okay. Right? That's true. All of that is true. However, there are numerous things that are found with each group of the dissenters, including those that go back to the land of Nephi, being King Noah and the priests, including the Zoramites. And that is that they are all anti-Christ. And so when you start moving toward a temporal, carnal, political move, and that's all you see is a Foucaultian, from Michel Foucault, a Foucaultian power dynamic, then you're pulling away from the theological argument that the Book of Mormon it represents in the first place, another testament of Jesus Christ. The dissenters are all anti-Christ. Don't forget that. It's not just that they are the poor ones and that they are the ones that are overshadowed. We don't know that. We don't know that at all. Maybe there's a larger portion of the Mulekites that are in that boat compared to the Nephites. But the Mulekites have the majority. Amlici, at the beginning of the book of Alma, raises a very large army to the point that it threatens, they come very close to the point where they're able to overthrow the Nephites. And I'm talking about those of the lineage of the Nephites and the organization, the church. And that's the second thing that the dissenters all agree on. They are anti-Christ. They want to destroy the church. All right? Professor Pagan, you're not mentioning these things. They want to destroy the church. And number 3, always the same, they want to destroy liberty. And of course, he's going to pass that up because critical theory does not like liberty. It is antithetical to liberty. And this is why for the last couple of years, I've been giving lectures called, for the most part, something along the lines of social justice and the Book of Mormon dissenters. Because the Book of Mormon is about the dissenters, not in the way that he is framing it. Or at least it's not the only truth that is there. They are anti-Christ, anti-church, and anti-liberty. So when you have the dissenters wanting to fight and, as he says, rebel against the Nephites, it is for those reasons, not just because the Nephite lineage has control and has power. That is what the entire Book of Mormon is about. Let's go to another clip.
And this is what I find interesting. I'll just share with you a few passages about the language of dispossession that threads itself through the different parties who rose up in opposition to Nephite rule, whether it's religious rule or political rule. So we'll take Cormor, for example. Now we're right around 76 BC. Listen to what he says and how he positions himself in his criticism of Nephite belief. Why do you yoke yourselves with such foolish things? In other words, I don't get what you guys are saying. It's foolish to me, right? For no man can know of anything which is to come. Behold, these things which ye say are handed down by holy prophets. Behold, they are foolish traditions of
Your fathers, not my fathers, your fathers, right?
Okay, so he's talking about the spirit of prophecy. These are spiritual issues. He is fighting against, Korihor here is fighting against the spirit of prophecy. He's at least superficially, he is an atheist.
So it begins to then feel like he is saying, I don't buy into your foreign rule or your foreign belief. Right?
Guy, come on. You know, what he's going into is decolonization or postcolonialism. That's what he's going into critical theory here. He is applying the academic zeitgeist of critical theory and all of its little disciplines of the hydra that I talk about, right? Critical social justice, critical theory is the body of the hydra. And then all of the heads that come out of it are almost like the departments in the humanities. And you have feminism, radical feminism. You've got identitarianism as a whole. You've got critical race theory. You've got all these other heads that sprout out from this body of critical theory. And he's trying to take everything and fit a square peg into a round hole.
In fact, if you go forward in time, the epistle to Laconia is found in 3 Nephi chapter 3. This is Gadianton. Gadianton is the leader of the Gadianton Robbers, who you know well. And it's interesting when you read very, very carefully about Gadianton's epistle to Laconia, he lays out his grievances as he understands them. And it's basically this.
As he understands them.
Self-rule was denied to them. They were dominated by a foreign people and treated like slaves. The resources had been taken from them. Foreign worship was imposed upon them. The foreign lifestyle was imposed upon them as well. So again, you find these narratives of dispossession that thread through the opposition to the Nephite nation as well. So here's some takeaways, right?
So again, I mean, you can see exactly the framing that he is going through here, right, on postcolonialism. And how these people have been dispossessed, therefore they become mad. It's not a matter of iniquity. It's not a matter of secret combinations. It's not a matter, so as he says, Gadianton is seeing things as he understands them, right? He's not evil. He's just dispossessed. And the terrorism and the murder and the pillaging of the Gadianton Robbers is simply in response to a power dynamic. Never mind that the Gadianton Robbers later take over the Lamanites. Were they dispossessed by the Lamanites as well? Only academia and critical theory can come into a sacred text like the Book of Mormon and turn the Gadianton Robbers into simply those that have grievances. It's unbelievable and yet so very believable. This is the religion of academia. This is the philosophies of men being imposed, being thrown over as a filter over the text of the Book of Mormon.
Again, the people of Mosiah, the Nephites, they brought technology, resources, skills, overtook the primitive economy of Zarahemla. I can't imagine, again, for people that are faction-driven, that are plagued by war, by contentions, how you have a cohesive economy. I just don't think that that's possible. And so you have these people who are united by belief, by skills, by culture, And they overtake very easily this primitive economy. And then the introduction of skills and resources, they were a boon to the nation, impoverished by infighting and ignorance. But the people of Mosiah quickly filled the ranks of the privileged. And as we've noted, all subsequent rulers came from the people of Mosiah. And the Nephite religion was never completely embraced by the nation as a whole. And this is why we see
That's true.
Many efforts to really preach the gospel within the Nephite nation. And there were rebellions that take place. But it's because there are people who just really never bought into it. They never understood it, and it was a difficult struggle to begin with.
True.
Now, these the combining of power and privilege, they become festering injustices. Now, we won't take the time to read this, but
Okay. Now, the combining of power and privilege. Again, here's the problem with focusing on this. It's not that those aren't issues. They are issues, and they need to be addressed. I have no problem with those types of things being addressed. Again, the Book of Mormon is a very political book, but it's not its primary purpose. And you can talk about you're using the zeitgeist of academia today and throwing the philosophies of men over the text of the Book of Mormon here to interpret it, to deconstruct it, if you will. And so all you're looking at is the power and privilege of the ruling class, which would be the Nephites. You're not talking about the doctrine of Christ and the gospel. This is what matters most. You're not talking about sin and wickedness and abominations. He's kind of pushing those things aside so that he can use that word iniquity and change it to inequity. Now, I will say something here that is important, and I have gone over this many times. This whole process here, that where there is disparity, cannot exist without charity. Right? It cannot exist without charity. And so that pride cycle, the pride is the exact opposite of charity, right? The love of God is charity. That is the tree of life. The fruit of the tree of life. The opposite side is the pride of the world. In the great and spacious buildings, you have one that lifts itself up, one that condescends below others. That's the juxtaposition of Lehi's dream. And so in that case, he's right? He's going and he's talking about a focus on the pride, the privilege. He's using obviously terms of academia today, but the concept is right. The concept is right. That there is pride that enters in, and then there becomes a stronger disparity. And the disparity isn't the issue. There is always disparity. Go listen or watch President Nelson's talk from this very recent General Conference in October in 2023, or President Oak's talk on the 3 different kingdoms. Disparity is an eternal principle. People are going to hate to hear that. It's an eternal principle if you have agency. Now, having said that, the love of God within us is what we have to try and reach out to others, to bring them to Christ. And if we become exclusive, if we become a club that does live on a higher privilege and does live on higher grounds because we're following certain principles and built a certain culture, and we look inward to ourselves then instead of reaching out for others, then we've got a major problem. But again, the issue is not victim and oppressor. The issue is the doctrine of Christ. It's always the issue. It is at the center of everything, including all the way back to the war in heaven. Those that are bitter for whatever reason, resentment, right, and are willing to murder and to rape and to pillage and to destroy liberty are not the heroes. Sorry. They're not the heroes. You can go all the way back to Cain and Abel, right? Abel was much more productive. He was following certain guidelines. He probably had more of the doctrine of Christ that he listened to and followed, and therefore he had more. He was given more, right? Where more is given, more is expected. And Cain, whose sacrifice is not acceptable, right? Because he doesn't follow the same principles. He has resentment because Abel has more. And therefore he goes and he murders Abel to bring him down, so to speak. Different ways to murder, so to speak, right? To bring him down and elevate himself in a shortcut fashion, right? So that's where this leads to. Now, I don't know that he talks about this. I don't think he did. I'd have to go through and listen to this whole thing again. But keep that in mind, because what is going to happen with the teaching of the Book of Mormon, with new books, new papers, new scholarship, is that the dissenters are going to become the victim heroes. And more, you're going to see scholarship remove the doctrine of Christ and put in a political Messiah, and remove sin and judgment and put in oppressor victim, critical theory. This is not hard to prognosticate, right? When you understand how this process works, when you have seen it go through institutions, go through history, deconstruct literature, and make these changes and add a different worldview, it's not hard to say this is where things are going. This is the end of this. And the end of the worldview for the Book of Mormon with critical theory is exactly that. The dissenters are the heroes. And those who are the righteous prophets and trying to hold on to the doctrine of Christ, not the pride. I'm not talking about the prideful Nephites, right? But those are going to be the wicked ones. They'll be thrown in with everybody else, and they'll be shown as they are homophobic, they are racist, they are privileged. They're looked on as, of course, in the Book of Mormon, white. But in the end, this is about the doctrine of Christ. This is about the church, and this is about liberty. And you've got to keep those principles in place. Now, having said that, I want to bring up these tweets or posts that were brought up by a Mormon Studies, a Latter-day Saint scholar, about the Book of Mormon. I'm not saying that Professor Pagan here would say anything like this. But again, he is taking baby steps, maybe larger steps, toward this end. All right, again, these are slides from a presentation that I was doing called The Nephite Dissenters and Social Justice. And again, looking here at critical theory, you can see what it goes after and what it will go after. If someone has adopted critical theory as a worldview, right, it is like a religion. This is not, it is not an idea that is gained, right? It is a worldview. And when someone picks up critical theory and they're a member of the church, then you cannot help but see eventually the church as an oppressor, because it's an authoritative figure. It's an authoritative institution. So eventually you look at the brethren as white old men who are part of the patriarchy, right? And you've heard that many times because that's what critical theory will tell you. And you believe that, and you are a victim of this. That's critical theory. Secondly, it's going to attack the doctrine of Christ because, again, it is antithetical to the doctrine of Christ. It's the exact opposite of what the atoning sacrifice is for. And number three, it's going to attack the Book of Mormon. This is what I've been saying for a couple of years now, and here it is. And this isn't the first time, and it's not the last. Critical theory is about liberation. And you can look at the founders of critical theory. They talk about this. And liberation means throwing off the shackles of anything. This could be social norms, your sexuality. It's throwing off anything that is oppressing you, holding you back from full expression and becoming the new man and the new woman. Throwing off the shackles of the oppressor. It is the opposite of Gethsemane, the exact opposite, where Christ lowers himself below all even the oppressors. He lowers himself below all, takes on the sins of the world, so that we can look at ourselves and change and repent and become something new through the doctrine of Christ. Again, so throw off the shackles of the oppressor through liberation and critical theory, or throw off the shackles of sin through Christ. They cannot coexist. All right, so here are the tweets or posts that are given by a couple of Mormon scholars. These are Latter-day Saint scholars. Here's the first one. At some point, I will have the wherewithal to voice everything I am learning right now about fascist theory. You can already get an idea of where they're coming from. Capitalism and Mormonism. But just know we have a rough time going forward if we're going to really reform the problems, right? Hope and change we are facing as a people and a society. Oh my heck. Okay, critical theory requires you to be an activist and to change things. Secondly, it's just good grief. I love critical theory, but so much of it boils down to here is how and why everything works. Well, it's really more about power dynamics. And it is so much worse than you think it is. Oh boy, is it amazing and illuminating, but also so bad. Oh my goodness, things are bad, so bad. Okay, of course. Because when you adopt critical theory, you are adopting a very dark worldview. It is a worldview like a religion. Here's a response to this from another. It says, this is the literary analysis of the Book of Mormon that the world needs. Really, it's a critical analysis or the literary criticism of the Book of Mormon that the world needs. Okay, there's a lot of people that are behind this type of thing. This is not a singularity, right? An anomaly. There are several Latter-day Saint scholars who have already fully adopted critical theory and use it in their study and their research and their reading of the Book of Mormon. Goes on and says, ACAB includes Nephi. What is ACAB? ACAB? ACAB is all cops are bastards. Includes Nephi. In other words, Nephi is an authoritative figure. And as you see down here below the next tweet here, it says, chopping unconscious people's heads off because he, in quotation marks, felt threatened. Like WTF. Nephi is not the hero of the Book of Mormon. He is not a good guy. And you say to yourself, well, how can somebody say that? They're Latter-day Saint and they're studying the Book of Mormon. Yeah, you can easily do that once you adopt critical theory. It turns everything on its head. It's like the saying in Isaiah, good will be called evil and evil will be called good. It's a perfect example of that. He says the Nephites are not the heroes of the Book of Mormon. Oftentimes they're not. They are a cautionary tale of what happens when a people are prejudiced and violent. Notice the prejudice part, and violent, as if the Lamanites aren't prejudiced, or the dissenters aren't prejudiced, and refuse to repent of their prejudice and violence. They are the villains. Of course, the Nephites themselves never go and attack the dissenters, and they never go and attack the Lamanites. It's the other way around. So he's got the Nephites as the villains, and he is, of course, bringing everything together here. Talking about Nephi here is not the hero and not a good guy. That includes the prophets. That's what critical theory does to the Book of Mormon. Now, again, I'm not saying that Professor Pagan would say something like this, but it's going down the same pathway. It is simply critical theory applied to the Book of Mormon. And scholars within Latter-day Saint circles, within the Maxwell Institute, within Mormon Studies, and as they publish their books and they publish their papers, these things will be brought out further into places like the academies, like Brigham Young University here, like BYU Idaho, like BYU Hawaii, and it'll be brought into your ward. You're going to start hearing these things, and you're going to say to yourself, what is this? How can somebody be saying Nephi is bad? How can somebody be saying that the dissenters, the Amalekiahites, are actually the victims? Now, I've talked about these two things opening up with this episode. First is how the Book of Mormon is going to be treated with critical theory. And two, which is completely attached to this, is liberation theology with the idea of God, after being softened up, will be turned into a political revolutionary. If you don't believe me, then please just be aware of it. Keep your eyes opened, and when you hear it, you'll know what is happening. Thanks for listening.